social media rally aiming to raise billions of dollars for refugee relief, and help is desperately needed. Just overnight, we saw horrific scenes in eastern Ukraine where a train station was bombed, killing at least 50 people. It's understood more than 4,000 residents were waiting for a train to escape the Russian invasion.
Ukraine's refugee crisis is being called the biggest in our lifetime, with more than 4 million residents already having fled their country. But the good news is that people around the world are doing what they can to help, including Australians who've built a supply chain now into Ukraine, delivering badly needed medical supplies. For more, we are joined by Sunrise Foreign Editor Dr. Heath Suter and Dr. Liz Pazlorski from the Ukrainian Federation in Australia. Good morning to you both. Keith, they need all the help that can be provided in Ukraine. Is enough flowing in? I mean, when we listen to those numbers, the number of people who have been displaced, 2 million of those are children and mothers, and then many more vulnerable remain there, can't even get out of the country.
Yeah, and the war is going badly for the Russians, and in fact we're now talking, General Mike Milley, the head of the US Defence Force, is actually now talking about a war that could drag on for months, if not years. So it's very worrying, and I think a lot of Russia's enemies are using it as a new Afghanistan, whereby what they want to do is to suck Russia into this quagmire and lead to the sort of upheavals which happened when the Russians were driven out of Afghanistan and the Soviet Union fell. Are people aiming to use this as a way of just battering Russia?
Look, we're hearing a lot of international leaders throwing around the term war crimes, and that Vladimir Putin is a war criminal, and certainly the bombing that we saw overnight on civilians doesn't look good at all in terms of the possibility of Vladimir Putin being charged for war crimes. How does this work? How does someone get prosecuted and possibly be brought to justice?
Well, ideally he'd be sent to the International Criminal Court in The Hague, which unfortunately the Americans, the Chinese, the Russians don't recognise. So there are complications there. There are also complications being able to say that Putin deliberately has ordered the killing of civilians. But we know he's got one war crime, which is crime against the peace, of just simply invading one country with another. So he's certainly a war criminal. I agree with President Biden on that. The problem will actually mean bringing him to trial. But perhaps a later government in Russia might say, yep, well, we'll send him to The Hague, get him off our books. And don't forget, it's not just Putin. The people who are doing the bombings are not Putin. They're Russians. So you've got to also, if you look back at the World War II war crimes trials, Hitler was dead, but there are a lot of other generals and diplomats who were punished. And that's what we've got to look at here, not just Putin, but we've got to go after all the generals, all the diplomats. So it'll be a huge war crimes trial after this.
You're right, it's going to be an incredibly long process, but that's a long way down the line. Dr. Pazlorski, you have family in Ukraine. The pictures that we have seen only convey a small part of the story for what it must be like for your family living there. Can you convey their experiences?
What I would like to convey is not only my family, but how Ukrainians feel generally, because I am in touch with a lot of the hospitals and a lot of the field stations, and their mood is changing quite dramatically. First of all, it was full of fear. And, you know, similar to the Australian fear of when COVID first hit, you fear for the vulnerable, the children, the elderly, all the people who need medical care. Ukrainians knew that Putin, right from the beginning, was targeting civilians. You know, we had the map of where the bombs were first landing on the airfields. Well, they actually targeted also hospitals at that particular time. So that got Ukrainians really, really angry. And at the same time, what's happening is that, you know, our uncles, our grandparents, our cousins, everyone knows someone whom is non-military, a civilian. They could be a teacher, they could be a professor, they could be a factory worker who's taken up arms to fight against the Russians. So the Ukrainian psyche now is, how can we support them? How can we help them? So there is an absolute determination in Ukraine not only to support those who are in the battlefields, but to win the war, and we will win.
I mean,
I've got no doubt about that whatsoever.
That is just extraordinary, isn't it? That just everyday civilians, what they're doing, this extraordinary resilience as well. Tell us about the donations of medical equipment that Australians have made. We understand 90 pallets have been sent already. How are they getting there, and what else is needed on Stand Up Ukraine Day today?
So what we've done is we've actually created a very strong supply chain between Australia, Europe and Ukraine. And the strength of this supply chain is that it is actually driven by civilians. You know, the Australian Federation of Ukrainian Organisations, when I joined this group, you know, I asked for volunteers, and suddenly I got these fantastic volunteers, doctors, students, and we set up a wonderful committee in Australia. But then we needed, you know, I had to ask some really basic questions like how do you set up a supply chain, because I wasn't quite sure. And we got the corporates involved. And the corporates are not talking about doing this for social responsibility. They're not talking about this to attract staff, to attract advertising, because they can't. You know, we're all worried about cyber attacks. They're doing this because they care. So that supply chain in Australia has been replicated in Europe, and it's been replicated in Ukraine, which is extremely organised in distributing the supplies. So what we need to do now is just to keep not only those medical supplies going, but the funds to pay for the medical supplies overseas. Currently, we've had extremely wonderful donations from the public hospitals.